Everyone thinks they know what fear feels like until the moment someone kicks down your door and you realize the world you built can be ripped apart in a single heartbeat. But let me take you back before the crash of splintered wood, before the sound of heels on broken glass, before the nightmare truly showed its teeth. Because 6 months earlier, I thought my life was finally settling into the peace I had worked 30 years to earn. My name is Marcus Henley. I am 52 years old, and after a lifetime of crawling through trenches laying power lines across 3 counties, I had finally retired. My reward was a 2-acre piece of heaven. My grandfather's fishing cabin on Clearwater Lake. It was not fancy. It was real, hand-hewn. Logs, a stone fireplace Pop had stacked with his own blistered hands, a screened porch that groaned like an old friend every time the wind brushed through it. The lake mist rose each dawn, painting silver halos over still water, and every breath of that air felt like childhood. Pop used to say, "The land chooses you," not the other way around, and I believed him because that cabin felt stitched into my blood. Pop also used to warn me, "Marcus, when someone wants your land real bad, find out why, because it is usually worth more than they are telling you." Back then, I thought it was just one of his country sayings like measure twice, cut once, but I would learn soon enough it was prophecy because that summer, Delilah Cromwell drove into our quiet, lakeside world like a thunderstorm in high heels, 58 years old, pearl white Escalade vanity plate that read, Rule 1, HOA President badge, gleaming on her blazer like a sheriff's star. She carried herself like a dictator disguised in perfume. That smelled more expensive than my monthly truck payment, and from the first moment she stepped onto our dock, I knew something dangerous had arrived. She taped her notice to my screen door at 7 in the morning, violation citation, unsightly dock. Structure-damaging community property values, $500 fine, compliance required in 72 hours, or penalties would accrue. I read it twice. My grandfather's dock, the same one we had repaired together when I was 12, now branded. An eyesore by someone who had been here less than 2 weeks when I confronted her politely on my own driveway. She folded her arms, smiled that cruel smile, and said, "Everyone on this lake answers to me, sweetie. Ask the Hendersons how well fighting." Me worked out for them. The Hendersons, my elderly neighbors who had mysteriously downsized last month after 23 years of living here. That was when something cold lodged in my stomach. She circled my property, snapping photos like a reel. Estate appraiser, my solar panels, my vegetable garden, Pop's hand-carved railings, nothing was safe. Her Escalade idled by the road, blasting chemical-scented air into the summer morning. 3 more citations followed that week, each more ridiculous than the last, each carrying bigger fines, each making it crystal clear that Delilah Cromwell had declared war on everything my family had built. The neighbors began to look away when I waved. Conversations stopped when I walked into the diner. It was as if she had poisoned the air and people inhaled her poison without realizing what it was. 3 days after her deadline expired, a certified letter arrived from Blackstone Meyer and Associates, cease and desist violation of community waterway. Regulations $3,000 owed retroactively, threat of a lien on my cabin. The words on that expensive letterhead made my coffee taste like ash. They had lawyers. I had a toolbox and a short fuse. Panic clawed at me until I remembered what. Pop always taught me, Marcus, when someone tries to legal talk you out of your land, go find the actual papers, never trust their words, only the records. So I drove to the county courthouse, musty basement smell of dust and ink, and there Betty, the clerk who had known Pop since his fishing tournament days, helped me pull the original surveys. What I found boiled my blood. The deed from 1963, stamped and official, showed that our property did not end at the waterline. It extended 50 feet into the lake. That dock was not trespassing on community property. It was standing firm in the middle of my lake. And here was the kicker. The HOA did not even exist until 1998, 35 years after Pop bought this land. His rights were grandfathered, untouchable. That discovery lit a fire in me. I marched home clutching those papers like weapons, believing I had finally turned the tide. But satisfaction is short-lived when your enemy is someone like Delilah, Cromwell. Because the moment I tried to drive out for groceries, I found her Escalade parked sideways across my driveway, not beside it, not near it, directly blocking me like some twisted traffic stop. When I tapped on her tinted window, she lowered it an inch and said, "Marcus, I am just reviewing the community parking regulations. This might take a while." Her perfume mixed with exhaust fumes choking me in my own yard. I stood there, a grown man who had wired half the county's power grid, being held hostage by a suburban tyrant with a smile. Within a week, she had launched the Lakeside Beautification Committee, which sounded friendly until you realized it was her personal hit squad. Suddenly, neighbors were turning against each other. Facebook posts dripping with passive-aggressive hashtags, Lakeside strong property values threatened by selfish residents. I became the villain of her curated narrative, a menace to the community she was claiming to protect. Whispers spread about eyesore. Cabin's dangerous wiring, contaminated water. My name was becoming a curse, whispered in comments liked and shared by people who never even set foot on my property. That was when I knew this was bigger than me. This was organized. She had influence. Her nephew was a deputy. Her husband worked in politics. Suddenly, every move I made was watched, every step recorded. Pop's words echoed in my mind. Find out why they want your land. And I realized the war had only just begun. What would you do if every knock on your door carried another threat? Another piece of paper designed to bleed you dry? That is what life became for me. The morning peace of the lake broken by the sound of boots on my porch and clipboards scratching. Judgments against me 3 days after the Escalade blockade. I heard the words that made my stomach knot, Building Inspector Dale Morrison standing in my doorway. A man I had worked with years back on electrical projects, his face red with shame. "Marcus, I got a complaint about unpermitted structures on your property. You know, I gotta follow up on these things." He crawled through every inch of my cabin, measuring my beams, tapping the foundation, checking my solar grid. 3 hours later, his verdict: everything. Not only up to code, but exceeding current safety standards. Pop had built it right. Dale muttered as he packed his clipboard. Whoever filed this complaint either has no clue what they are talking about, or they are just trying to waste my time. But we both knew the truth. It was Karen weaponizing bureaucracy against me. The next day came. Environmental Officer Janet Bennett, septic contamination reports false again, but she had to follow up. Then Fire Marshal Bob Rodriguez, with anonymous tips about hazardous solar panels, each inspection wasting my time, each report creating an official paper trail that painted me as a problem homeowner. The smell of pine that used to calm me now smelled like surveillance and suspicion. And Karen, she was busy building her kingdom on Facebook. Concerned citizen posts, carefully angled photos of my cabin, making it look like a rundown shack. Interviews with Channel 7, where she stood right on my dock, calling me a threat to children's safety and an irresponsible property owner. She smiled for the cameras while accusing me of endangering the community. The texts from neighbors came like machine gun fire. "Marcus, what is going on? Marcus, why did you let it get this bad?" But she had miscalculated, because truth always leaks out. My buddy Jake Martinez from the Electricians Union saw her news spot, called me up and said, "Marcus, that lady is full of it. Everyone knows you built half the county's clean energy infrastructure within 2 days." Jake had 20 master electricians drive by my place, vouching for my work, posting proof online that my solar setup was the gold standard. Suddenly, her hazardous wiring narrative cracked like thin ice under boots. Still, the harassment grew. Orange spray paint across my mailbox, comply, or leave captured on my hidden camera at 2:30 in the morning. The license plate clear as daylight, the vandal none other than Karen herself. When I called the sheriff, Deputy Chad Cromwell, her nephew, showed up. He shrugged. "Probably just kids," he said, and drove off with a smirk, like he knew exactly what game was being played. I felt it then. That line Pop always used. Sometimes you need bigger guns for a bigger fight. It was time for bigger guns. My lawyer friend Chuck Davis stopped by, cracked a beer with me, and said, "Marcus, the Attorney General's office is investigating HOA corruption across the state. Your story sounds like every pattern they are tracking: elderly families harassed, forced to sell, cash buyers swooping in, developers flipping properties. It all rang too true." That night, I started logging everything. Every citation, every inspection, every false report, my cabin filled with stacks of paper timelines, photos, evidence of a pattern. It was bigger than my dock. It was a machine grinding down people like the Hendersons, like old Mr. Peterson, like the young couple with the baby who had been threatened over playground equipment. Everyone was prey in Karen's scheme. But still, the weight pressed heavy. Each evening I sat on Pop's porch, beer in hand, wondering if peace was gone forever. The chair that once felt like comfort now felt like a battlefield seat. The wind through the pines whispering not calm, but warning. And then the smear campaign hit a Facebook post. "Urgent safety concerns. Aggressive behavior from lakefront resident. Please keep your children away from the East Shore." She wrote hashtags about safety protection, protecting our kids. The implication was clear. She was calling me Dangerous Me, the man who ran the kids' fishing derby for 15 years within hours. The post was shared dozens of times, comments piling up, people who never met me, declaring me unstable, threatening, rumors spreading like fire, and half the accounts were fake stock photos, generic names, a digital lynch mob built by Karen's own hands. 2 days later, she filed for a restraining order, accusing me of threats, lies from top to bottom, but it still became public record. My name now tied to the word dangerous. The judge dismissed it for lack of evidence, but the damage was done. Neighbors whispered. My friends kept their distance. Karen had painted me as a monster, and she smiled while doing it. I thought of giving in. Thought of selling, packing up, disappearing into some quiet corner of the world, but then something happened. Retired Judge Bill Carter, who used to fish with Pop, showed up with a thermos of coffee. "Marcus," he said, "do not let her isolate you." That is how these people win. People do not fight this hard over petty disputes. There is money behind it. Big money. He was right, and the community began to rally. The VFW issued statements defending me. The Historical Society highlighted my cabin as a cultural landmark. The environmental group praised my sustainable living model one by one. Decent voices rose up against her lies. But Karen did not stop. She pushed harder, calling in utilities to cut my power with bogus safety investigations, 3 days without. Electricity, she filed false police reports about disturbances. Suspicious activity, drug operations, deputies showed up each time. Each incident adding to a file meant to bury me in suspicion, and always it was Deputy Chad showing up, smirking, offering the same advice. If you just complied, all this would go away. That was when it hit me. This was not just a fight for me. This was a message to the whole community: bend the knee or get destroyed. The Hendersons had lived this nightmare before they sold. I was living it now, and if I gave up, someone else would be next. The lake no longer sang with peace. It whispered with fear, but fear has a breaking point, and mine was coming soon. Why does hope always appear at the edge of despair? I was sitting at Pop's oak table, drowning in stacks of violation notices and inspection reports, when I saw something so small, it almost slipped past me, a tiny line at the bottom of one of Karen's. Citations, fines, payable to Lakeside Estates, Community Improvement Fund, account number 847291. The words sounded official, but something about them made my skin prickle. 30 years of reading electrical contracts had taught me the devil always hides in the fine print. The next morning, I was back in the courthouse basement. Betty the clerk smiling knowingly as she slid folders across the counter. "Marcus, you sure do spend a lot of time down here lately," she said. I told her I needed to see. The HOA financial filings and what she laid out across that dusty desk changed everything. The numbers were wrong. Not just sloppy wrong, criminally wrong. $280,000 collected for emergency dock repairs, no repairs ever completed. $150,000 spent on landscaping by Cromwell Grounds and Maintenance, a company registered 3 weeks after Karen took office, owned, conveniently, by her brother-in-law. It got worse. The HOA had filed storm damage insurance claims. 3 times in 18 months, payouts of $95,000 each. But the National Weather Service reports showed clear skies on those exact dates. Betty whispered, "Marcus, this looks like fraud. Plain and simple. Fraud." My hands shook as I photocopied each page. The smooth paper felt like weapons evidence of organized theft. Property management fees $5,000 a month to Clearwater Property Solutions, listed at a P.O. box in the same district Karen lived in. Every piece fit together, like gears in a machine. Karen was not just harassing neighbors, she was running a criminal empire, siphoning money through fake companies, driving down property values, forcing families to sell cheap, then flipping the land with her political connections. The Hendersons, the elderly couples who sold, they had been robbed twice, once by fear, once by fraud. That night, Pop's cabin transformed into an investigation unit. Maps of property lines taped to walls, photos, evidence strings connecting. Citations to financial transactions, the kind of setup you see on detective shows. Except this was real. This was my life and my neighbors' lives at stake when Chuck introduced me to prosecutors, Sarah Mitchell and David Bennett from the Attorney General's office. They did not flinch. Sarah sharp-eyed, flipping through papers. David quiet intensity. Both agreeing what I had uncovered went far beyond HOA squabbles. This was systematic fraud across counties. Then Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI joined our calls, white-collar crime unit, calm voice, but her words sliced clean. "Marcus, this is classic. Money laundering, shell companies, fake invoices, insurance fraud. We can tie this to larger development scams across the state. But we need more. Then documents. We need her in the act. And we need witnesses." Chuck worked the phones, gathering families who had been chewed up by Karen's machine. We met at the VFW hall, one after another. They spoke, shaking voices, telling the same story. Harassment, fake violations, escalating fines, until they caved. The Thompsons $8,000 in bogus penalties. The Garcias $12,000 in assessments for lake improvements that never happened. Mrs. Patterson, 43 years in her cabin until Karen scared her into moving with her daughter in Florida. Every story. The same handwriting, the same intimidation, the same losses. Frank Weber, a retired accountant, reviewed the numbers and shook his head. This HOA has not filed proper tax returns in 2 years. He said that alone is federal tax evasion. The room pulsed with anger, with grief, but also with something stronger. Resolve. Agent Torres explained the best way to build an airtight case is to catch her committing crimes in real time. Sarah added, "The Attorney General is preparing to announce new HOA reform legislation. What better location than the very cabin where homeowners' rights were trampled? If Karen follows her pattern, she will not be able to resist crashing the meeting. Her arrogance will override reason. We can have media, law enforcement, and the community all present." For the first time, I felt the ground shift in my favor. The trap was forming. Karen, meanwhile, grew more reckless, like a cornered animal. First, it was sabotage. My solar panels mysteriously failing. Jake found loosened wires, professional-level tampering. We installed hidden cameras, and 2 nights later we caught her red-handed, creeping with wire cutters at 3 in the morning, cigarette glowing in the dark, her face caught crystal clear. Next, my boat dock cut chains, my base boat drifting across the lake scratched against rocks, Pop's pride and joy desecrated. Then came the septic system, sabotage chemicals poured into it, destroying everything. $3,200 in repairs, but also forensic proof of deliberate destruction. It was calculated, and it was evidence. While I scrubbed sewage from my property, Karen flooded social media with bot accounts spreading lies about me. Her nephew Chad cruised past my cabin 4 or 5 times a day, staring down my visitors running their plates. Intimidation, plain and simple. The inspector who had cleared my property weeks earlier suddenly returned with new violations. False. Again, the fire marshal got anonymous calls, the environmental office reports of illegal dumping. All lies, each one, death by 1,000 cuts. But she did not stop with me. She went after my supporters. Jake's contracting license under review. Judge Bill Carter targeted with a bogus complaint. The VFW hit with surprise inspections. The Historical Society accused of zoning violations. She sent the message clear support. Marcus and you will be next. She wanted me isolated, destroyed. But every attack documented her crimes deeper. Every smear, another nail in her coffin. Agent Torres called it textbook escalation, and she was right. Still, the nights grew heavier. I would sit on Pop's porch listening to the loons, their cries echoing across water. That no longer felt like home, but I knew we were closing in. Karen thought she was breaking me, but every desperate move was feeding the case against her, and the trap was almost ready. Why do tyrants never see the walls closing in? Karen thought she was untouchable, but desperation makes people sloppy. Her next move revealed everything she was planning to turn my fight for survival into her stage for glory. We learned through surveillance that she had reached out to blogger networks about government corruption, spinning a story that the Attorney General was targeting her family. For political reasons, she wanted to become a martyr. She wanted to live stream her confrontation at my cabin as proof of persecution. Agent Torres called it perfect. She is going to commit felonies on camera and think she is winning. Sarah from the AG office agreed. Karen's obsession with control will force her to show up, and she will self-destruct. The trap was ready. We placed hidden cameras throughout my cabin, wired microphones into the walls, undercover officers stationed across the property, federal agents positioned by the woodshed, media notified to be ready for breaking news. The air felt charged like a job site before a storm when everyone knew one wrong move could bring the wires down the night before the meeting. Karen cracked. She made threatening phone calls to families who had supported me, promising consequences if they kept siding with government harassment. Every word recorded, every call, adding charges of intimidation and conspiracy. The sound of her shrill voice left my neighbors shaken but also furious. She was unraveling, and her arrogance blinded her to the fact that every step was documented. That evening I sat on Pop's porch, the sun sinking into the lake, turning it gold and crimson, the loons calling across the water. I held Pop's worn Bible and read his underlined verse about David and Goliath he had, scribbled in the margin. Sometimes the little guy wins because he is fighting for something bigger than himself. I closed my eyes and promised him I would not let this land fall to corruption. Morning came. Attorney General Patricia Williamson arrived, not with an army, but with calm presence, mid-50s, tough eyes, but warm voice, carrying a thermos of coffee. She settled into Pop's recliner like she belonged there. Marcus, she said, your documentation has helped us connect HOA corruption across 6 counties. What you uncovered is not just local. This is organized theft statewide. I felt my chest swell with pride and fear. Pride that we had come this far. Fear that Karen was moments away from detonating her own life. Then we heard it, the roar of her Escalade, gravel spraying like shrapnel, doors slamming, orders, shouted about camera angles and audio. Her voice outside rising in volume, broadcasting for her followers. This is it, folks, she shouted. We are about to expose the corruption targeting our family. She stomped across my porch, heels clicking like a countdown timer, then crash. The door exploded, inward shards flying. My cabin filled with chaos, and Karen stormed in. Phone raised, live streaming every second. I demand to know why the Attorney General is meeting with this man, she screamed. This is political persecution. I have rights. Her eyes wild, her perfume choking the air. But the moment Attorney General Williamson stood calmly and held up her badge, the live stream captured Karen's face. Freezing terror dawning on her followers, watching in real time. Mrs. Cromwell Williamson said, voice steady, I am the Attorney General. You have just committed multiple felonies in my presence, and your own broadcast is recording every word. The silence lasted only a beat. Then the door filled with agents. Torres stepping forward, flanked by federal officers. Mrs. Cromwell, you are under arrest for fraud, extortion, witness, intimidation, and harassment. Thanks to your live stream, we have your confession and 3,000 witnesses. The click of handcuffs echoed like final judgment. Karen's phone slipped clattering to the floor, still streaming her fall from power. Her face pale, her voice breaking. This is my community. I have jurisdiction. Here, she muttered, clutching her HOA badge as if it were armor, but no badge could save her. Neighbors gathered on the porch, their eyes wide as the tyrant who had ruled them through fear was led out in chains. Mrs. Patterson, tears streaming down her face, whispered, Finally. Finally, the Escalade with its vanity plate Rule 1 was towed away as evidence. Karen stumbled in cuffs past my dock, past the panels, past every piece of property she had tried to destroy, shouting, This is not over, my husband. We'll fix this. But her words rang hollow in the summer air. 3 months later, Judge Michael Harrison made sure it was over, sentencing her to 3 years in federal prison, ordering $340,000 restitution, and banning her for life from any HOA board. Her husband, Robert, caught in his own scandal, resigned in disgrace, stripped of his political connections, sentenced to 18 months for conspiracy. Their empire crumbled like rotten wood, and the HOA dissolved faster than sugar in hot coffee. In its place, we built the Clearwater Lake Volunteer Association. No mandatory fees, no citations, no dictators, just neighbors caring for each other. We cut away the poison and planted something new, and in the process, justice reached farther than our little lake. The Attorney General used our case to push new laws. The Henley Act requiring audits and criminal penalties for HOA harassment across the state. Other counties prosecuted similar rings. The FBI tied our evidence to scams in 5 states, and yet the sweetest victory was not legal. It was human. The Hendersons returned, buying a new cabin down the shore. Mrs. Patterson came back from Florida, threw a block party, laughter replacing fear, property values soared, families breathed again. My cabin, once painted as an eyesore, became a model of sustainable living, featured in renewable energy programs. I even started Pop's Legacy Scholarship, helping kids enter trade schools, because he always believed honest work built honest lives. Sometimes I still sit on Pop's porch, the lake glowing in the twilight, the loons calling, their voices echoing like promises. No more citations, no more threats, just peace and the memory of a fight that proved David can still topple Goliath. Netflix even filmed a documentary, HOA Hell, how one man took down a criminal empire, and when people watch it, they will know the truth that no tyrant, no matter how loud, how arrogant, how well-connected, can stand forever when a community finally says enough. Have you ever felt the weight of silence, the kind that presses on your chest after the storm has passed when the house is standing? But the echoes of chaos still rattle through the walls. That was what life felt like after Karen's arrest. Quiet. But not truly quiet, because the cracks she had left in our community still hummed with fear and disbelief. People had lived so long under her shadow, they did not know how to step into the sun again. The night she was hauled away in cuffs, I sat on Pop's porch, watching her Escalade disappear down the road, the sound of the engine fading like the last note of a bad song. I thought I would feel nothing but triumph. Instead, I felt a strange hollowness, like standing in the ruins of a battle you won, but knowing the ground will never feel the same. Her threats echoed in my head. This is not over, my husband will fix this. And for a while, I believed maybe she was right. Maybe the corruption was too deep to kill with one trial. But the days began to shift. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid me now stopped in my driveway, hands trembling as they apologized. Susan Martinez, tears in her eyes, said, "Marcus, We were scared. She had something on everyone. I hugged her and told her fear makes prisoners of us all, but we are free now one by one. The walls fell. Conversations returned, laughter carried across the lake. Barbecues popped back up on porches. It was like watching color bleed back into an old photograph, and yet my phone never stopped buzzing. Reporters, politicians, strangers from across the country, all hungry for the story. The Netflix crew set up cameras in my cabin, their lenses capturing Pop's fireplace, the scars on my dock, the marks of battle carved into wood and stone. They asked me, "Marcus, how did you keep going through all this?" And I told them truth is stubborn and so am I. The little guy only wins if he refuses to fall down. The sentencing hearing 3 months later felt like Christmas morning Judge Harrison's gavel cracking against the bench as he read the words 3 years in federal prison, restitution, lifetime ban from HOA leadership, Robert Cromwell, 18 months conspiracy and abuse of office. The courtroom packed with neighbors who had endured her tyranny. Their cheers hushed but electric. The feeling of chains breaking, invisible ones that had wrapped around all of us. Money began to flow back. Restitution checks arriving in battered mailboxes, homeowners who had been drained by bogus assessments. Suddenly holding proof that justice was more than a word, the Hendersons bought a new cabin just 2 lots down. Mrs. Patterson moved back from Florida, her block party lasting until sunrise, fireworks bursting over the lake, laughter carrying across the water like music. It was not just victory, it was healing. The state did more than punish. They reformed the Henley Act. My name attached to legislation requiring financial audits, banning harassment schemes, creating criminal penalties for predatory HOAs. My little war had become a roadmap for thousands of families across the state and beyond. Counties across 5 states uncovered similar fraud rings, the FBI calling our case a cornerstone of their investigation. Agent Torres telling me, "Marcus, you helped expose a network bigger than any of us imagined." But even as the world celebrated, I found myself drawn to the small things. The porch at sunset, the smell of pine, the sound of loons, my hands rough from repairing the septic system, Karen. Destroyed but steady as I planted new seeds in Pop's garden. The lake seemed to breathe again, no longer poisoned by fear, no longer shadowed by lies. I used part of my whistleblower compensation to create Pop's Legacy Scholarship $500 grants for kids entering trade schools because Pop always said, "Working with your hands builds an honest life." And when I handed the first scholarship to a nervous 17-year-old kid whose father had been laid off, I felt Pop's presence stronger than ever. In that moment, I knew the fight had not just saved land, it had planted hope for a new generation. And the community built something more. The Clearwater Lake Festival, born from the ashes of division, now raising money for veterans' housing. Programs, we cooked barbecue on the shore, music filled the air. Kids laughed, boats glided across water free of sabotage. The bitterness Karen left behind replaced by sweetness stronger than any perfume she once sprayed across our docks late one night. I sat by the fire, the Netflix crew gone, the reporters quiet, the community asleep. I stared at the stars reflected in the lake, and I realized Karen had tried to break me by isolating me. But what she really did was wake a sleeping giant, a community that had forgotten its strength until one woman's greed forced us to remember Pop had been right. The land chooses you, but it also tests you. And if you stand stubborn enough, if you endure long enough, you can outlast any tyrant. And in that silence, I finally understood peace again, not the fragile peace of hiding from conflict, but the earned peace of having faced it head-on and won. Do you know what it feels like when your name suddenly belongs to strangers, people you will never meet, whispering it, cheering it, arguing about it? That was my life after the Henley Act, past the cabin that once felt like a prison of harassment. became the stage for a statewide fight against corruption. Reporters lined my dock fishing for quotes, cameras pointed at Pop's porch where he once sat in silence, and I wondered what he would think of all this fame tied to his quiet cabin on Clear Water Lake. Netflix called their documentary HOA Hell How One Man Took Down a Criminal Empire. They filmed everything, every scar on my dock, every creak in my floorboards, every neighbor whose voice shook as they told the truth. The camera lights burned, hot. But what burned hotter was the anger of millions watching online, people sending me letters, emails, comments. Marcus, you gave us courage. Marcus, you told our story because it turned out Karen was not unique. She was a face in a crowd of petty, tyrants strangling communities across America. But fame is a double-edged blade. Some called me a hero. Others called me a liar. Trolls flooded my social media accusing me of destroying an innocent woman's life, ignoring the mountain of evidence, captured on her own live stream, and sometimes late at night. Their words wormed into my head, doubt whispering maybe you pushed too far, maybe you should have walked away. But then I remembered the Hendersons forced out of their home Mrs. Patterson, crying as she left the porch where she had spent 4 decades. I remembered the spray paint on my mailbox, the false police reports, the sabotage, and I knew walking away would have meant surrendering not just my land but everyone's. Life at the lake shifted into something new. Property values soared, cabins once abandoned by fear, now sold for fair prices. Families moved back, children played again on docks that had been silent for years. My solar panels, once painted as hazards, now toured by environmental agencies, showcasing renewable living reporters asking me, Marcus, how did you keep this place off the grid all these years? I would smile and say, Pops taught me simple is strong and strong lasts. I poured part of the whistleblower reward into the Pops Legacy Scholarship, watching young men and women hold checks that would carry them into trade schools and apprenticeships. And every time I shook a nervous hand, I felt his calloused palm again. His voice saying, Marcus, make sure you leave something better than you found it. And I knew I was honoring him the only way I could, but peace never lasts without vigilance. The cracks left by corruption do not vanish overnight. Neighbors still carried scars. Suspicion still lingered. In glances at meetings, whispers about what if another Karen rises, what if the next tyrant finds a new loophole, and I would stand in front of them and remind them, fear feeds, dictators, transparency kills them, and we built our new volunteer association. On that principle, no fees, no fines, just neighbors working shoulder to shoulder. The Clearwater Festival became our symbol. Music, laughter, barbecue, smoke rising into the summer sky, boats circling the lake, families free again, the VFW raising money for veterans' housing programs, the Historical Society restoring our oldest cabins, the children laughing where once only accusations echoed. I walked through it all, hearing Pop's words in the wind, the land chooses you, and now I finally believed it. Had chosen me to fight, not just for myself, but for everyone. And yet I still carried the weight at night. The porch creaked under me. The loons called across the water, and in their voices I heard every whisper of fear, every knock of inspectors, every false report, every slam of Karen's heels on my dock, the memories sharp as glass. But I held them close, because scars are proof that healing happened, and I refused to forget. One evening, Chuck joined me with a beer. He said, Marcus, you know the AG office is still uncovering rings tied to Karen. Your case gave them the blueprint. She thought she was the queen, but she was just a pawn in something bigger. His words chilled me, but also steeled me, because maybe this was not just about Clearwater Lake. Maybe it was about every community being strangled by false authority. Maybe the fight was only beginning. The camera crews left, the lights went dark, the reporters stopped calling, but the story lived on. Neighbors telling neighbors, families telling. Their kids and me sitting on Pop's porch whispering to the night we are free because we refused to bend, and I promised myself and him that if another storm came, I would be ready, because once you face down a tyrant, nothing looks the same again. You know your strength, you know your worth, and you know no matter how loud Goliath shouts, David can still find his mark. Have you ever wondered what victory really feels like? Not the cheering in the courtroom, not the cameras flashing, not the headlines, but the quiet moment after when the noise dies down and you are left alone with yourself. That was what I faced. Months after Karen was sentenced because the lake had healed. The neighbors had returned, property values soared, and yet inside me the storm still rolled. I kept waiting for another shoe to drop, for another Escalade to block my driveway, for another citation to appear taped to my porch, but none came, only silence. Silence but not peace, because victory carries weight, it carries responsibility. When reporters called asking Marcus, "What is next? What will you do now?" I never had an answer because I never fought for fame. I fought to save Pop's cabin. I fought to honor his memory. And now that it was safe, I wondered who I was without the battle. But then the letters began arriving, handwritten, shaky words from strangers across the country. People who had their own Karens, their own tyrants, terrorizing their neighborhoods, HOA presidents with too much power, destroying lives with fake fines, harassment, fraud. They wrote, "Marcus, your story gave us hope. Marcus, we know we are not alone anymore." That was when I understood the fight had not ended. It had only shifted from survival to service. I began traveling to other communities, standing in town halls, telling our story, explaining how we built our case, how we documented every lie, how we rallied our neighbors. I watched faces light with courage as they realized they could fight too. And every time I spoke, Pop's voice echoed in my heart. Sometimes the little guy wins because he fights for something bigger than himself. But the scars still bled. Karen's smear campaigns lived on in corners of the internet, trolls who claimed I fabricated everything, that the FBI framed her, that she was a victim of politics. Some nights I scrolled too long through the hate, my chest heavy, my mind whispering, what if they are right? But then I would walk out onto the porch, feel the night air, hear the loons calling, and remember the faces of the Hendersons smiling in their new cabin, Mrs. Patterson dancing at the block party, children laughing by the docks, and I knew the truth cannot be erased by lies. The Clearwater Volunteer Association flourished, neighbors fixing docks together, planting trees, hosting cleanup days without fear, without citations, just community. It was what Pop always wanted. Neighbors. Working shoulder to shoulder, not out of fear but love, and I would watch them sometimes, my chest tight with pride, because out of all the pain, all the sabotage, all the intimidation, something beautiful had grown stronger than it ever was before. Still, I knew corruption never sleeps. I got calls from prosecutors across the state thanking me for the blueprint, using our evidence to bust fraud rings in counties I had never heard of. Agent Torres told me, "Marcus, your cabin helped open doors to cases in 5 states. And when she said that, I felt a chill, because Pop's cabin, the little 2-acre slice of heaven, had become the spark of a fire burning across the nation, and I wondered if he had known somehow when he warned me about land, if he had. Known this place would one day be more than a home. Netflix finished their documentary crews, packed up, but the story kept spreading, and with it came invitations, city councils, veterans groups, neighborhood coalitions. They all wanted to hear how an old lineman and his stubbornness toppled a criminal empire. Sometimes I laughed at the absurdity, me, a retired electrician standing in front of crowds, but every time I told the story and saw heads nod, eyes tear up, hands clap, I realized the story was no longer mine. It belonged to everyone fighting their own battles. One night, as the fire crackled on the porch, I pulled out Pop's old Bible again, the verse underlined, David and Goliath, the words in his handwriting, "Sometimes the little guy wins," because he is fighting for something bigger. I traced his letters with my finger and whispered, "We did it, Pop. We really did." And for the first time in months, I felt peace, real peace. Because victory is not the roar of the crowd, it is the quiet of the lake. It is the laughter of children free from fear. It is neighbors gathering not in suspicion but in joy. It is knowing that sometimes the stubborn man in the little cabin can stand against the giant and win. Everyone asked me, Marcus, was it worth? It was the sleepless nights, the fear, the vandalism, the smear campaigns, the endless wait worth the fight. And I never answer right away. Because the truth is complicated. The truth is, victory costs something. It takes pieces of you. It carves scars that never fade. But when I sit on Pop's porch, when I breathe the lake air, when I hear the loons cry across the water, I know, yes, it was worth it, every bruise, every loss, every sleepless night. Because this fight was never just about me. It was about the Hendersons forced out by fear. It was about Mrs. Patterson, driven to abandon 4 decades of memories. It was about every neighbor who once whispered in their own kitchens, afraid of a woman with a badge and a title, but no soul. It was about proving that fear only wins when we stay silent, and I refused to stay silent. The day Netflix aired the documentary HOA, hell, the messages poured in families from Texas, Ohio, Florida, California, telling me, Marcus, we have a Karen too, Marcus. We are under attack. Marcus, we thought we were alone until we saw your story. And in their voices, I heard the same pain, the same fear, the same desperation. And I realized my story had become their story. My cabin had become a lighthouse shining across a dark sea. The community thrived stronger than ever. The festival grew each year. Veterans housed through the funds, children lifted by Pop's legacy. Scholarship cabins restored. Neighbors united, the lake sparkled brighter. Because it was free from shadows, and every time I watched the sunset paint the water in gold, I felt Pop's presence beside me, his voice reminding me, Marcus, the land chooses you, and it chose you for this fight. But the greatest victory was the quiet one. The night I walked to the end of the dock, sat down, legs dangling over the water, and felt nothing pressing on my chest. No fear, no anger, just peace, real peace. The kind that comes only after you have stood against the storm and survived it. Thought of Karen, her heels clicking across my porch, her voice dripping venom. Her badge held high as if it made her queen, and I thought of her face the moment the Attorney General revealed the truth, that moment when her empire crumbled in front of thousands watching live, and I realized arrogance always eats itself. Karen sits behind bars now, her husband disgraced her empire, ashes her name, cursed instead of feared, and me, I sit in the same chair Pop built decades ago, the same porch, the same lake. Only now I carry not just my story, but the stories of thousands who refuse to bend to tyrants, and I know that is the real legacy. Sometimes when visitors come, families fighting their own HOA nightmares, I invite them to stay in the guest cabin built with Netflix money. I walk them through the papers, the maps, the photos. I show them how to document, how to endure, how to fight, and when they leave stronger, and I feel Pop's words again. Sometimes the little guy wins because he is fighting for something bigger than himself. The battle is not over. Corruption will always find new cracks to crawl through. But now there is a roadmap, a story proof that the little man with the cabin can topple an empire, and every time another. Family sends me a letter saying we fought back and we won. I know the fight was worth every drop of sweat, every tear, every scar. So was it worth it? Yes, it was worth it, because now the lake sings again, now children laugh again, now neighbors smile. Again, now Pop's cabin stands as it always did, stubborn, strong, unyielding. And I sit on the porch, beer in hand, watching the sun sink into the horizon, knowing David can still beat Goliath, knowing sometimes the smallest voices echo the loudest, and knowing that in the end, truth always wins. You've heard this confession. Now wait until you hear the next one.